Good evening, Chris. Thanks, my friend. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Happy Friday. You know how news keeps happening on Fridays in recent weeks? We're having another one of those. Two big stories have landed late in the day today and into tonight that are kind of a 1-2 punch for this White House and its ongoing scandal and its ongoing mishandling of national security issues. One of these stories is really brand new. I think at least it will be brand new to you tonight when I tell you about it. The other one is a rather devastating follow-up to something that broke last night that we covered quite a bit on last night's show. We've got one of the top Democrats from the Intelligence Committee here tonight to talk with us about both of these things, but they are both developing and or breaking tonight. Let's just get right to it. Okay, first one. Less than a week and a half after the election, the White House announced that retired General Michael Flynn would be named National Security Advisor to the president. It wasn't a total surprise, right? Flynn had been around during the campaign. He was clearly a big wheel in Trump land. But even still, even though the announcement that he would be National Security Advisor, it couldn't be construed as a surprise. It was still, nevertheless, kind of a shock, particularly to experienced national security folks who had followed Mike Flynn's career for a while. Him being named National Security Advisor, for a lot of people, was a real holy smokes moment. Because even though General Mike Flynn had a very distinguished military career, he had many years of very difficult service that everybody respects, by the time he came home at the end of his military career and started working in the Pentagon, Mike Flynn had earned a new kind of reputation. He very quickly became known as, forgive me, kind of a nut. Let me explain part of why. Here's an example. Quote, days after Islamist militants stormed the American diplomatic compound in Benghazi, Libya in 2012, General Michael Flynn reached a conclusion that stunned some of his subordinates at the Defense Intelligence Agency. He told them Iran had a role in the attack. Now, he added, it was their job to prove it. Flynn soon took to pushing analysts to find Iran's hidden hand in the Benghazi disaster, according to current and former officials familiar with the episode. Quote, but those investigations found no evidence of any links between Benghazi and Iran. And the general's stubborn insistence that there was a link reminded some officials at the agency of how the Bush administration had once relentlessly sought to connect Saddam Hussein in Iraq to the 9/11 attacks. I remember when the New York Times put that lead on the front page of the Sunday paper about Mike Flynn. I remember the feeling of dread that washed over me reading that about him. There's been an attack. Prove it's Iran. Hey, intelligence agency, prove this for me. I've decided it in advance. Now find me the proof. Michael Flynn was not just your average retired general when they picked him to be National Security Advisor. I mean, before the new administration, before the new president hired him to be National Security Advisor, the previous president had fired him. Had fired Mike Flynn from the Defense Intelligence Agency for being kind of a kook, for being viewed by his colleagues and by his subordinates as kind of a nutball. And that particular kind of nutballery is something that we've got experience with as a country, recent bad experience. I mean, having fixed ideas about some boogeyman in the world and then telling intelligence agencies to produce intel that proves what you already believe about that boogeyman, and that's bad old days stuff, right? I mean, that's bad old days stuff from 9/11 and the Iraq War. That's the Bush White House in the first hours after 9/11 deciding that they wanted to use that attack to go after Saddam. And then they spent months getting the intelligence agencies to produce evidence that maybe bolstered that conclusion. I mean, there's going to be a lot of competition for what's going to be the first line in Dick Cheney's obituary, but one of the top contenders is going to be his role in trying to train the intelligence agencies after 9/11, that when they were asked about Iraq and 9/11, about Iraq and al-Qaeda, about Iraq and WMDs, the correct answer to any of those questions was always, sir, yes, sir. I mean, we supposedly learned this lesson, right? You don't tell the nation's intelligence agencies what to conclude and then ask them for a report that proves that. We've been down that road. It cost thousands of American lives. You just don't do that. You don't do that anymore. Not anymore. asterisk, because maybe we are doing that again. And this is the first punch in that 1-2 punch tonight. As of last night, what we had from CNN reporting was this. It was a senior White House official telling CNN this, quote, "The Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice are working on an intelligence report that will demonstrate that the security threat from these 7 countries is substantial." Oops. Notice the phrasing there. What is that report going to? Put the quote back up there. Can we put that back up on the screen? Put it back up. Yeah, okay. Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice are working on an intelligence report that will demonstrate that the security threat for these 7 countries is substantial. Oh, really? Are you sure that's what it's going to say? This intelligence report is not done yet. But you know what it will say already? Yeah, that's not the way it works. CNN's reporting late last night was this declaration from the White House. This order from the White House was going over very poorly with actual intelligence folks. Quote, "This is an assignment that has caused concern among some administration intelligence officials who see this White House charge as the politicization of intelligence. Quote, a conclusion in search of evidence. This is, quote, the Trump White House seeking an intelligence report to fit the policy instead of the other way around." I mean, this is basic stuff. Maybe we didn't have a sharp feeling about this as a country before the Iraq war disaster, but we do now. It's very simple. On any circumstance, on any topic, telling an intelligence agency to come up with a report that concludes X, where you give them the answer when you give them the assignment. I mean, that's flashing red lights, bells and whistles, danger, Will Robinson, right? I mean, this is resign in protest stuff. This is something we have gone through before as a country. It went very badly. We are never supposed to go there again, no matter what the topic is. In this case, what the topic is the Muslim ban. The federal courts, as you know, they've blocked the refugee ban and the Muslim ban. At the appeals court level, the court said they were blocking it in part because the government hadn't shown any evidence that the ban was rational, that it was strategically rational on national security grounds. And so, right, that makes sense procedurally. You know, if the government wants to defend, the administration wants to defend its Muslim ban or some version of its Muslim ban in court, they're going to have to prove to the court that the Muslim ban makes sense. I mean, we knew at some point the court wrangling over that policy would get to the point where they had to prove that it was for a reasonable reason. But it's one thing for the White House, for the administration, right, the government to make up their argument for why banning people from those 7 countries is a rational thing. It's one thing for them to state that case and cite their evidence and try to persuade the court that those people from those 7 countries have to be banned from coming to our country. It's one thing for them to make that argument. It's another thing for them to go to the Office of Intelligence and Analysis at the Department of Homeland Security and say, hey, give us an intelligence report that proves we need the Muslim ban. That you cannot do. And that was the status of this story late last night. And now tonight, oh boy, did this thing blow up. You knew it would blow up, right? This kind of thing has to blow up when you push it to that kind of a breaking point. Now it has blown up because now people at the Office of Intelligence and Analysis at the Homeland Security Department, the intelligence agency at DHS, turns out they did do a report on the Muslim ban. They did do a report on whether the Muslim ban makes sense, on whether banning travel to the United States by people who hold passports from those 7 Muslim countries, whether that makes sense. They did it. They did look into it. They got that assignment from the White House. They should look into whether or not that policy makes sense on national security grounds, and they produced their report on the subject. It is 3 pages long, and it finds that, no, the travel ban does not make sense on national security grounds. And we'll put the document up on screen in just a second. But here's the thing to know about the scandal nature of this right now, about the politics of this right now, the churn and the political fistfight and the scandal in this right now, and the trouble that the new administration has that is coming from inside the House, right? And it's this. The Department of Homeland Security has just been taken over by the Trump folks, right? There's a Trump Homeland Security Secretary. They have brought in Trump acting undersecretaries at various levels. The new people who just arrived, the Trump folks, apparently tried to spike this intelligence report. They axed it. They said, we're not putting that out. But this is the report. that the intelligence agency inside Homeland Security created. This is real. This is actually what they concluded. And we do still have a real free press. And so now, inevitably, that spiked report, which they wouldn't release, Homeland Security assures us that it is real, but they spiked it. This spiked report, which they wouldn't release and didn't want to put out because of what it says, presumably, that report has now been leaked to, obtained by the Associated Press. We know the White House demanded an intelligence report that, what was it? What was the quote? That will demonstrate that the security threat for these 7 countries is substantial. But what they actually got was this: citizenship likely an unreliable indicator of terrorist threat to the United States. That's the title of it. First line of the key findings there. Department of Homeland Security, Office of Intelligence and Analysis assess that country of citizenship is unlikely to be a reliable indicator of terrorist activity. Oh. Intelligence agencies are not perfect. They are not always apolitical, even though they're supposed to be. But intelligence agencies will also stand up for themselves and their work sometimes when they need to. And this is one of those moments. This is simultaneously a signal, right, direct evidence that the Trump Muslim ban is believed by the intelligence community to be hokum in terms of it having any national security rationale, right? So this is simultaneously good detail on that. It is also a flashing red light siren that the Trump folks are already directing intelligence agencies to produce material that fits the need of the White House. So that's one. If you haven't seen this, we will post this 3-page document online at maddoblog.com tonight so you can read this real assessment by the intelligence agency within Homeland Security about why Trump's Muslim ban isn't justified on national security grounds. Again, this report was spiked by senior administration officials after the White House told Homeland Security they wanted a different conclusion from a report like this. But the real thing has now seen the light of day thanks to the Associated Press. And thanks to whoever inside Homeland Security made sure that saw the light of day by giving it to the Associated Press. Now, I said there was a 1-2 punch today in these national security stories. That's one. 2, second big story tonight, is increasingly starting to feel like the open question of whether or not the White House Chief of Staff gets to keep his job. When last we left White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, when we last left him in the news, he was being named as the White House official who contacted the FBI about the FBI's reported investigation into contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia while the Russian government was attacking our election last year. Well, today the White House got very excited to push back on that reporting. We don't exactly know what they thought was the damaging thing about that reporting that they were pushing back on. But in their big, excited, hours-long pushback today, they also actually confirmed repeatedly and emphatically the worst part of it. They confirmed today in no uncertain terms that yes, Reince Priebus, yes, the White House Chief of Staff, they now confirm he did discuss with the Deputy Director of the FBI and the Director of the FBI what the FBI knows about contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia. The White House is confirming that the White House Chief of Staff contacted and pressured the FBI about that ongoing investigation. At least we believe it's an ongoing investigation. It's been reported and confirmed by multiple sources that the FBI is investigating contacts between the Trump folks and Russia while Russia was messing with our election. The FBI is not confirming that on the record. The other investigations that we know for sure are ongoing into the Trump folks and their contacts with Russia while Russia was messing with our election. The other investigations that we know for sure are happening are being led by the intelligence committees in the House and Senate. And Democrats have been concerned that the Republican chairman of those committees, one of whom was a member of the Trump transition team, the Democrats have been concerned that the chairman of those intelligence committees are not it's not what I meant to say, are not independent enough. They cannot approach this without partisanship, and that they're already too much on the White House's side on this issue. That's why Democrats have been saying, no, let's have a select committee. Let's do it outside the normal committee system. You can't have these two intelligence chairmen leading these committees. They're not independent enough. Those have been the Democrats' worries, Democrats' suspicions. Those suspicions were driven home with a pile driver tonight when, just before airtime, the Washington Post broke this news, that in addition to lobbying the FBI directly about the FBI investigation into Trump and Russia, the White House also successfully enlisted the Republican chairman of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. These guys were supposed to be leading impartial, hard-nosed investigations into this matter. The White House successfully enlisted Congressman Devin Nunes and Senator Richard Burr, the heads of the intelligence committees. The White House got them to call reporters and tell reporters that there's really nothing to see here in this scandal, that the contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia, there's really nothing there. The White House apparently asked these committee chairmen to call reporters and say that, and these committee chairmen did it. What? Quote, the Trump administration has enlisted senior members of the intelligence community and Congress in efforts to counter news stories about Trump associates' ties to Russia. Acting at the behest of the White House, the officials made calls to news organizations last week. The calls were orchestrated by the White House. The effort involved senior lawmakers with access to classified intelligence about Russia, including Senator Richard Burr and Congressman Devin Nunes, the chairman of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees. Devin Nunes confirmed tonight that he had spoken to at least one reporter on this matter, quote, at the request of a White House communications aide. Senator Burr also acknowledged that he, quote, had conversations about Russia-related news reports with the White House and then engaged with news organizations. This is incredible. I mean, it's one thing to have the White House Chief of Staff leaning on the FBI about this investigation. The other investigations are supposed to be run by the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. The chairmen of those two committees have been enlisted by the White House to call reporters off the record and tell them, hey, there's nothing to this. Russia and the Trump folks, don't report on that. There's nothing there. Trust me, I've got access to this intelligence. These are the guys who are supposed to be leading the investigation in Congress. Greg Miller and Adam Entes have this story tonight in the Washington Post, and they note with admirable restraint, quote, the decision to involve these officials could be perceived as undercutting the credibility of the ongoing congressional probes. Yeah, you think? You think? More ahead. Stay with us. So we're continuing to follow this breaking news tonight. The Washington Post breaking news just this evening that will, frankly, tie your socks in a knot. If you were thinking that maybe the whole Trump-Russia thing was going to be investigated impartially and aggressively by Congress, where the intelligence committees are running those congressional investigations. The two Republican chairmen of the intelligence committees in the House and the Senate, they have both tonight admitted to the Washington Post that they have been calling reporters off the record at the request of the White House to tell reporters that there's nothing to these stories. There's nothing to worry about when it comes to the Trump campaign's contacts with Russia, which is a thing they are supposedly leading independent investigations about. More than that, the Washington Post also reports tonight that senior officials at U.S. intelligence agencies were also roped into making these press calls, making calls at the request of the White House to reporters, to tell reporters that they should basically stand down on this Russia-Trump connection stuff. Intelligence agencies and the investigatory committees in Congress are both supposed to be completely independent of the White House on a matter like this and investigating the White House on a matter like this. But apparently, they're all working for the White House and trying to make the bad press on this go away. Stunning, stunning reporting. Joining us now is one of the senior Democrats in the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Congressman Himes, thank you very much for being here. This is turning out to be a weird night.
It sure is. Good to be with you, Rachel.
What is your overall reaction? I want to ask you about the Homeland Security report about the Muslim ban, where the White House was apparently giving them a direction as to what they wanted that intelligence report to say. I want to ask you about that. But first, I want to get your reaction to this Washington Post reporting tonight about the Trump-Russia connection.
Yeah, well, you said it right. We've seen this movie before, right? Those of us who remember the lead up to the Iraq War, watched as I think the intelligence community and all of the analysts, there was no doubt where the White House wanted to be, and it damaged an awful lot of reputations, including of the CIA, including of Colin Powell. And of course, we went to war and thousands of Americans died. And now we see that instinct again, where the White House is making it very clear the conclusion they're looking for. Now, on this travel ban thing, you don't need to be on the Intelligence Committee to know that the vast bulk of the terrorists that hit us on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, a country not on the list. You can look at the terrorist attacks in Europe and know that those terrorist attacks were undertaken by European citizens. If you study the region a little bit, you'll know that one of the biggest sources of ISIS fighters in Syria is Tunisia, all countries which are not on this seven-nation list. And so it shouldn't surprise anybody that when the intelligence community finally does do their work, they will conclude that the president's idea is just a foolish one.
And on that particular story, on that DHS story, what we've got there is the intelligence agency within DHS apparently being told by the White House what their intelligence report should conclude, that it should conclude that those banning travelers from those 7 countries makes sense. Apparently, analysts within the intelligence agency and DHS didn't follow instructions. They produced an independent report that said quite the opposite of that. It appears, as we piece together this reporting from AP and Washington Post, that the Trump officials inside DHS spiked that report, wanted not to release it, and now these intelligence analysts, or somebody who had access to their work, released it to the press instead in order to get around the administration officials who were trying to disappear that report. Does that make you feel worried about that kind of a leak? Do you feel like that sort of a leak is heroic? Is it somewhere in between?
Well, I'm ambivalent about it, of course, because leaks, government by leak is no way to run a government. But you've got an awful lot of very patriotic people in places like DHS and CIA and NSA and FBI who have been vilified by this president. Before he even got sworn in, he was drawing comparisons between the intelligence community and Nazi Germany. This morning on Twitter, he attacked the FBI brutally. These are people working for these agencies. They take their jobs very seriously. They are all about floating up the truth in the most objective fashion they can. And now you've got these people who are trying to convince America that building a really big wall will solve our undocumented immigration problem. They're trying to convince people that if we just cut off the flow of folks from 7 countries, that's going to keep us safe. They know better, and so they're in a terrible position because I don't think these people want to leak, but when they see their government spiraling off in such a dangerous direction, I think they feel torn and they say, boy, the truth must out, and therefore I'm going to, release a report like the DHS report.
Congressman, you've said that you want to expand the House Intelligence Committee's investigation into looking at this issue of the White House trying to shape intelligence conclusions. But let me just also ask you, chairman of your committee, Republican Congressman Devin Nunes, he admits to the Washington Post tonight that at the request of the White House, he's been making calls to reporters trying to shape coverage, to tamp down coverage about the connection between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. He's supposedly leading your committee's investigation into those connections. How big a problem is this?
Well, it's a problem on 2 fronts. Number one, I'm involved in this investigation, and I know for a fact that we are not at a point in the investigation where anybody, not the chairman, not me, or anybody else, can draw any firm conclusions about what the communications were between the Trump people and the Russians. So we're just not at a point where any conclusion can be drawn. So anybody, whether it's the chairman or anybody else who says, here are the facts, they're not speaking from good information. They're not telling the truth. That's point number one. Point number 2, of course, is, and you made this point earlier, and this illustrates why we need an outside 9/11 type commission. I mean, these chairmen, before the committee's investigations were done, have come out with what they, I guess, hope or believe will be the conclusion, certainly what Donald Trump would hope the conclusion would be. But this is exactly why. Look, we're in the political fray. This is exactly why we need an outside commission of elder statesmen and elder stateswomen who aren't tarred in the way we all are by partisan questions. Look, look, when I say something about this, the president's supporters are going to say, well, that Himes guy, he's a Democrat. And that's why this needs to be done by an outside commission.
Yeah, particularly if the chairman of these two committees are admitting they're already working with the White House on spinning this particular issue.
Yeah, that should indicate a sort of compromise of objectivity, right?
Representative Jim Himes, member of the House Intelligence Committee, really appreciate your time tonight, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Rachel.
To that point, there was this initial sort of thrust in Congress when the details started coming out about the Trump campaign and Russia while Russia was influencing our election. There was initial thrust that maybe we do need a 9/11 style commission. Maybe we do need something independent. We need something outside the partisan system. That died, right? That was going to be Lindsey Graham and John McCain pushing for that. Remember when they were getting all that good press because they were being so independent and pushing so hard on the Russia issue? They gave that up. They said, no, let's let the intelligence community do it. Let's let the intelligence committees do it. Now that the intelligence committees are working with the White House on spinning this story, that question has to come back up. Lindsey Graham, John McCain, you guys want to be here on Monday? I wouldn't interrupt. We'd talk for a long time. It'd be awesome. We'll be right back. Last night on this show, one of our guests broke some important news about the new National Security Advisor.
H.R. McMaster, who is a highly regarded military officer, he's a normal human being. He's smart, he's strategic, he's pragmatic. You know, he had an all hands with the National Security Council staff today, and he said a lot of the right things. He's, including saying that he doesn't believe that they should be using the term radical Islamic terrorists because he believes that folks they're fighting are un-Islamic.
That was on this show last night. Colin Kahl, he served as National Security Advisor to Vice President Biden. He was on the National Security Council. He reported first here on our show that according to multiple sources, the new National Security Advisor, General McMaster, he's telling the National Security Council now that he doesn't believe they should use that term, radical Islamic terrorist. And that makes sense in the real world, right? It calls terrorists Islamic, when ideally you'd be promoting and recognizing a vision of Islam in which terrorists are seen as sacrilegious, heretical, murdering monsters, right? So it makes sense that an experienced strategic thinker in national security would not want to use a phrase like radical Islamic terrorism. Makes sense in the real world. Does not make sense in this White House, though, after the new president spent the whole campaign talking about how Democrats were afraid to say radical Islamic terrorist and how he would insist on saying it, even if the Democrats would not. He used the phrase again at CPAC this morning. He said, we're going to keep radical Islamic terrorists the hell out of our country. But apparently, his new national security advisor says, no, we shouldn't be saying that. It's counterproductive. It's non-strategic. And that's a newsworthy departure between the president and his national security advisor. It's also a frequent kind of occurrence in this administration. Here's another example. Yesterday, the president told visiting business leaders at the White House that his crackdown on immigrants, detaining and deporting people all over the country, yesterday he called that a, quote, military operation. Just a couple of hours later in Mexico City, this was his Secretary of Homeland Security.
Listen to this. No, repeat, no use of military force in immigration operations. None.
Don't pay attention to what, I mean it. Listen to this. None. At a sweaty stream of consciousness rally in Florida last weekend, the president bragged about how he had personally intervened to cut the cost of Air Force One by $1 billion, which is great. President says he saved us $1 billion on the cost of the new Air Force One. The president did not actually save us $1 billion on the cost of the new Air Force One. The Air Force had to come in and clean up after him on this one. Quote, look at the headline, Air Force stumped by Trump's claim of $1 billion savings on jet. An Air Force spokesman telling reporters, quote, to my knowledge, I have not been told that we have that information. He then referred reporters back to the White House for news on whatever magic $1 billion coupon the president found. The president also has insisted that it wasn't just a campaign thing, wasn't just shooting off his mouth. We really should have stolen Iraq's oil, and we might yet have another chance to steal Iraq's oil. He has repeated that as president, repeated that even while standing in front of the CIA memorial wall. After that, the defense secretary had to go to Baghdad to say, no, don't listen to that man. We're not taking anybody's oil.
The question is about seizing Iraqi oil. So is that a position you think?
All of us here in this room, all of us in America have generally paid for our gas and oil all along, and I'm sure that we will continue to do so in the future. We're not in Iraq to seize anybody's oil.
This keeps happening. I mean, other countries, even just us American citizens, if you are told something by this government, it is important to now ask, with whom am I speaking? Can I have your name? Can I have your supervisor's name? And that was before the Washington Post broke this news tonight, that the White House secretly enlisted senior people at the intelligence agencies and the chairman of the two committees investigating the president's Russia ties, enlisted those folks to speak to reporters about dropping the Russia story. Do we have any kind of precedent for an administration conducting not just the regular business of government, but even security and intelligence in this way? Joining us now is Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian. Michael, it's really nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Nice to see you, Rachel.
So we are getting these sort of 1-2 punches.
Right, we are.
And on the one hand, it feels like, maybe it's too much, maybe it's hard to keep up with. On the other hand, I feel like these stories are proceeding linearly, that we keep getting new information about troubling ties between the president and his associates in his campaign and Russia. And increasingly, with each new day, we keep getting news about the administration trying to stop investigations of those ties and to influence people who might be in charge of leading those kinds of investigations. Do you see it that way? Is it that linear? And do we have any examples from history that compare to this?
Well, the obvious example, and I hope this does not turn out to be this, but Richard Nixon was driven out of office because he tried to stop the investigation of the Watergate. The smoking gun tape of June 23rd, 1972. He talked to his chief of staff, Bob Haldeman, and said, get the CIA to tell the FBI to stay the hell out of this investigation. He was trying to shut that down. So what the Post story is suggesting tonight is that there was an effort to enlist, big members of Congress and also big members of the intelligence community to call reporters and say, essentially stay the hell out of this investigation of, there's not much to the story of Russia ties between the Trump campaign, between the members of the Trump campaign and officials in Russia. The next step that I hope this does not go to is that next is found evidence of efforts by the White House to, trim this investigation in Congress or shut down the FBI. When you were talking, Rachel, I was thinking of, we also saw Meet the Press last weekend, and Chuck Todd was asking John McCain, do you think the Republicans in Congress can impartially investigate this Russia story? And he said, I hope and believe they can. And then he sort of chuckled and said, well, I guess I have more hope than belief.
Wow. I guess, the idea that the White House would call on important legislators to help sell their agenda, to help move something in the press, that is not unusual. It seems to me that what is unusual, what just perks up my ears and makes me think about the timeline of presidential history, is the fact that these are the two intelligence chairmen who are leading the only investigations that exist in Congress.
These are the judges. These are the judges in whatever hearing is going to go on, at least the one that we're talking about. And also, above and beyond the morality of it, and above and beyond the fact that this is not the way the government is supposed to be run, it's not too bright because, for reporters to get calls from intelligence officials and, high officials in Congress who are supposed to be investigating this, the natural question that they would ask, and they obviously did, was, who got you to do this? Was it the White House?
And how on earth can you now go lead an investigation while you're making these calls lobbying me on my coverage?
It's like if they did not want a 9/11 commission, they are going to be perhaps compelled to do it by essentially their own actions.
Yes, exactly. Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian. Michael, thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Amazing to watch.
Yeah.
What a story.
I feel like that whole 1-2 punch thing, I feel it right here and right here.
Right.
Thank you, Michael.
Be well, Rachel.
All right.